Good morning. Long time no see for all of you. It's a blessing to be back from vacation. I have opened the YouTube stream as well as the Facebook post, and I have my cell phone with me. If you'd like to message me any questions or other comments today, that'll work just fine. So we're ready to rock and roll. Yeah, I'll probably do it like that. We are still on Proverbs 24 today. We are looking at verses 23 through 29. And you know, the verses here give a sense that the Proverbs and the Psalms are a very loosely organized book. So we shouldn't necessarily look at the Psalms or the Proverbs being a sort of chronological book like the Torah or like Joshua or Judges. They're not really trying to represent a historic moment in time or a chronological section of history. What we see here then is it looks as though, perhaps I'm kind of thinking in a modern thought here, and I don't know how accurate this is, but you would have here's a good example. C.S. Lewis wrote several books, Mere Christianity, The Trouble with Pain, so he's writing on different topics, and he puts out compendiums of his thoughts and wisdom. C.S. Lewis on love, C.S. Lewis on marriage, all these kind of things. So perhaps, even though they're from a similar or the same Solomon author, they might be different compendiums of sayings. So we have this title here, this subtitle, where it goes, and it's actually in the text right here. These also are sayings of the wise, or also these things belong to the wise. So they're just another set of thoughts that wise people have made. Perhaps it's Solomon, or perhaps it's just general wisdom sayings. So we launch off then, chapter 24, verse 23. We jump into a new section of wisdom sayings. Okay. Partiality in judging is not good. Whoever says to the wicked, "You are in the right," will be cursed by peoples, abhorred by nations. But those who rebuke the wicked will have delight, and a good blessing will come upon them. Wow. These sayings just keep seeming to hit the head on where we're at, and it's almost painful how much they hit the head at where we're at. So partiality in judging is not good. I think this is basically just held out as a single thought. It's a train of judgment ideas, so the ideas in judgment, but this first one, it would stand maybe not connected to the ones that come following. Connected in theme, but not necessarily connected in sentence structure. Let's put it that way. So just a statement. A thought, perhaps, would be a better word. To show partiality of persons in judgment is not good. This is kind of, we want to deny that the roots of our modern American democratic legal justice system are not based on Judeo-Christian ethic is a farce. It just is. I think this is an idea that is alive and well in our judicial system, although it is abused from time to time. The idea that judges are supposed to be impartial when they judge over people. They shouldn't be partial to one person or another, especially we would imagine adjudicating is between two people, right? So if there's two people favoring one person over another, obviously gives an unfair advantage. It's not how God wishes things to be. We talk about the merits, we talk about the arguments, the evidence, right? I don't think God would necessarily go that way. Now, why does the government do that? Well, the government isn't. God works through the government, but they're not. It's not run. The government's not necessarily. God's not sitting in the judgment seat. I mean, He is, but He isn't. Does that make sense? So in Leviticus, for example, there's a great little section here. I should try to find it. I always talk about it, but I don't ever actually read the. Oh, I'm sorry. It's from Numbers. Well, let's see. That's why I should find it. Let's read it. Okay. So. See if there's a reference to it in Leviticus. I bet you there is. So find that version as well. Okay. Yeah, it is in Leviticus, but we'll just read this one here. So this is Numbers 5, chapter. Numbers chapter 5, verse 16 and following. Okay. And the priest shall bring her near and set her before the Lord. So this is if a man's wife goes astray and breaks faith with him. So it starts off with basically the husband thinks that the wife has committed adultery. He feels very jealous. He's upset about it, so he wants proof. But there is no proof. The only person who knows is the person she committed adultery with, if she did, and he's not talking either, right? So here's how this is dealt with. The priest shall bring her near and set her before the Lord, and the priest shall take holy water in an earthenware vessel, and take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, and put it into the water. And the priest shall set the woman before the Lord, and unbind the hair of the woman's head, and place in her hands the grain offering of remembrance, which is the grain offering of jealousy. And in his hand the priest shall have the water of bitterness that brings the curse. And the priest shall make her take an oath, saying, if no man has lain with you, and if you have not turned aside to uncleanness while you were under your husband's authority, be free from this water of bitterness that brings a curse. But if you've gone astray, though you are under your husband's authority, and if you've defiled yourself and some man other than your husband has slain with you, then let the priest make the woman take the oath of the curse. The Lord make you a curse and an oath among your people, and the Lord makes your thigh fall away and your body swell. May this water that brings a curse pass in your bowels and make your womb swell and your thigh fall away. The woman shall say, Amen. And the priest shall write his curses in the book and wash them off in the water of bitterness, and he shall make the woman drink the water of bitterness that brings the curse, and the water that brings the curse shall enter her and cause bitter pain. Let's see here. Now, here we go. So obviously it talks a lot, but verse 28 then it goes, but if a woman has not defiled herself and is clean, then she shall be free and shall conceive children. This is the law in cases of jealousy when the wife, though under her husband authority, goes astray and defiles herself, or when the spirit of justice comes over a man, he is jealous of his wife, then he shall set the woman before the Lord, and the priest shall carry out for her all this law. The man shall be free from iniquity, but the woman shall bear her iniquity. So, in other words, through this process, a woman who is accused of adultery or a man who is jealous, she can receive justice, true justice. And the really crazy thing is, we've seen this before where people have been declared not guilty by a court of law, but they still bear that stain, right? This especially the one you might think about would be like a teacher who is accused of having relations with a kid, and then it comes out that it's not true, But unfortunately, that teacher will never work again as a teacher. They're forever stained by the accusations of the children. There's nothing they can do about it. That stain stays on you. So what I'm saying is that when God is put in a place of judgment over people, they get justice, and they get justice perfectly, and it's declared by God. So it's absolutely proof. In other words, when this woman drinks the water, she either dies or she lives. And if she lives, then she's absolutely declared just of the crime that she's been committed of. Now, we may think to ourselves, well, that's a terrible system of judgment. But why? Because it always shows the truth? Why should we be afraid of the truth? Ever. You know, why if you've done something, then you should be punished for it. And if you haven't, then you'll be declared righteous by God. Where's the problem in this? In a human setting, then, God sitting in that kind of judgment seat over people would be the best situation. But that's not what we have. We are judged by our peers. Like it or not, you know, whether education or not, judges are our peers. They are people like us, maybe the same age, maybe older, maybe younger, whatever. But they're people like us, and they should come in then with no preconceived notions about who is right and who is wrong before they start doing judgments. Unfortunately, I think I've been learning more about this, and I think what's happened is that we become so polarized as a culture, both, you know, maybe like traditional conservative versus liberal progressive. I don't want to use the party names because they don't mean anything anymore. We become polarized from one another. And what we've done now is we've made the polarized positions that we live in our new faith. Okay? So it's not that we disagree on ideas. It's that I'm right and you're wrong. And anything that I do to you is justified because I'm right and you're wrong, right? So I can bend the law, or as a judge, I can go in with the preconceived notion that you're wrong even before I've heard the case, because I subscribe to one opinion, you subscribe to the wrong opinion, not another opinion, the wrong opinion. So whatever I do to you is justified. Now, I don't think that all judges are like this, but I think a percentage of them are. They've given up impartiality, and they've taken to the same kind of petty, polarized games that we all play, where the person who is opposite of me, who doesn't agree with my opinion, is my enemy, and then I'm justified in punishing them. Where we should remember that vengeance is mine, thus says the Lord. What am I here to do? I'm here to do my job. What's my job? To walk into this room. And because I'm not God and I can't know perfectly, right? That's why God is such a great judge, because he knows everything. Since I'm not God and I can't do that, I'm supposed to come in and make my judgments based on everything that's laid out in front of me. What's the evidence? What are the circumstances? You know, maybe in terms of adjudicating how much punishment, how old is the person? What are the levels of crime that's been committed? All these kind of things. I'm going to do my vocation as judge to the best of my ability, but I can't do it perfectly because I'm not God. But if I go in there with these petty polarized viewpoints and let them make the judgment as opposed to being impartial, we'll see that's not right either. So, I mean, that couldn't be more straightforward, I don't think. You know, it's just so straightforward. Partiality judging is not good. You know what else too? Partiality and judging is not good in the church. We make opinions. The church is filled with conflict. Let's just be honest, because the church is filled with people. Have you gone out there lately? There's conflict out there too. There's conflict everywhere that people are. People are sinful. Conflict erupts, right? And then conflict eventually becomes, you know, are you with me or are you with them? Kind of stuff. Sometimes a pastor is called, sometimes an elder is called, sometimes a leadership person is called to try to sort things out, do the best they can with conflict situation in the church. We should not go into any kind of conflict situation, especially in the church, with any kind of impartiality towards a person, because that would be wrong. Rather, we should judge it on the basis of what information we're given. Okay, enough of that. Verse 24. Whoever says to the wicked, you are in the right, will be cursed by peoples, abhorred by nations. But those who rebuke the wicked will have delight, and a good blessing will come upon them. I don't think enough is being said about the Muslim Uyghur what's the word? Holocaust, I guess, internment. This is the same. I mean, I hate hyperbole. I hate how people are constantly throwing around the word Nazi and everything else. Okay, but putting people on trains and sending them to re-education camps is about as close as you can get to being a Nazi without like saying without giving the Heil Hitler. It really is. The Chinese government is taking Uyghur Muslims and they're carting them off to re-education camps. They call them opportunity camps where they're going to train them for other workplaces, but they shave their hair, and it's been proven that they've been taking their organs and selling them on the black market. I mean, this is terrible stuff. We have so muddled our channels of information. I'm curious how many of you have actually heard about this. And this is such a terrible thing that's going on. Why is the front page center news coronavirus every day and not this? Coronavirus is important. I'm not saying it isn't, but this is genocide going on in our very midst. And it doesn't make have you even heard a word of it on the evening news? I think if we had a fair representation of what was going on in the world, I would like to think that a lot of people would condemn this. So we have this little verse 25 then, right? No, verse 24 starting. Cursed by peoples, abhorred by nations. So I would hope that the majority of people in the nations, the peoples, would curse this evil that's going on. At the same point, it's very strange that there are a few people who are standing up and rebuking these things. I'm probably going to get myself in trouble. This guy is a polarizing guy too. I don't necessarily love the man. I don't think he has a very good ethic in terms of his personal relationships, but Trump and his administration have called this out and said the persecution of Uyghur Muslims in China is bad and should be sanctioned. The persecution of the Chinese government against the people of Hong Kong, it's bad, should be called out, should be sanctioned. But everything is so mixed up. We can't even agree on anymore what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad. Sending people off, cutting off their hair, treating them like human chattel is wrong, regardless if they're Christian or Muslim or whatever. There's a recent thing just the other day where Z is making sure that all Christian churches in China have to remove all depictions of Jesus now. This is a new thing that came out like a day or two ago. So all small rural churches, house churches, whatever churches, they have to remove all their representations of Christ. And that is wrong. I don't know how else to say it. Of course, they persecuted the followers of Falun Gong. I don't want to talk about whether Falun Gong is right, but I don't see how we can disagree that they're persecuting those people because they have a religious system that's on par with the communist. See, that's the real nut of it, right? They don't care about religion, but whenever religion gets as powerful or possibly even more powerful in the people's mind than the communist government, the CCP, that's when things happen. That's when it has to be dealt with, So that's just one thing. We can backtrack. We can start this all over again. Talk about Planned Parenthood. Yeah, what's going on in Planned Parenthood? My goodness. If we were a righteous people, we would look at the overwhelming numbers of people who are killed in those Planned Parenthood clinics every day and cry out injustice, wickedness. But instead, a lot of our national media is saying, well, that's okay. It's women's health. It's women's health care, which is just a joke. No, it's not okay. Um, so, you know, I think there's a curse here laid out, right? So it's not just the wicked. The wicked have their own problems. It's those who go to the wicked and say everything you're doing is okay. You're in the right? They will be cursed by peoples, abhorred by nations. Um, to a certain degree, I can't help but think about the Antifa protests and things going on in Portland, right? The local government's calling everything good, fine, hunky dory when policemen are getting hit with bottles and frozen bottles of water and hammers and things like that, and no one's talking about it. So it's saying that, like, a lot of times now we're seeing those leaders in those areas and even some of the national media going along with and saying the protesters are right, the police are wrong. We're trying to bring an end to the violence. I mean, we can just keep recycling this. It keeps popping up in so many different ways. But those who rebuke the wicked will have delight, and a good blessing will come upon them. Now, this is huge here. I think this. I for one have been weak in this, and I'm sad about that. I've been afraid. I'm afraid that if I say truthful things, that people will turn away from me and even my church, my preaching, right? We need to be a people who calls out wrong. Wrong is wrong. When something's wrong, we should call it out and just say, no, I don't agree with that. It is wrong. We shouldn't do these things. It's not okay. So standing by and doing nothing is not the Christian thing to do. We want to take the eighth commandment and make that kind of the be all end all that, well, since we have the eighth commandment, I shouldn't say anything. No, if we know what's right and what's wrong, because God has taught us from his 10 commandments, then we ought to speak it. We ought to tell the truth. Burning down buildings because you're angry isn't right. Breaking windows with bricks because you're mad is not the right way to go about trying to change the system or change the politics to better. Maybe it is the right thing. Maybe it's the right cause, but how you do a thing matters. How we go about by whatever means necessary, right? How we go about something matters too, not just the end result. So we should be a people who are not timid or afraid. Even if it might cause alienation and things like that, we should call a thing what it is. But also we should be quick to offer, the truth, then quick to remind people the greater truth. Hey, you know what? I understand you're angry. I understand you made bad mistakes. But let me tell you something. You're so focused on this life that you're losing sight of the next. We may face persecutions and troubles. We may face all sorts of evil and wickedness in this world. But a new heavens and new earth are coming. We're going to be set free from these things. So I understand your desire to fight what's wrong, but there are limits to how we go about fighting for what's right, for what we think is good. Destroying property just to destroy it is not the right thing. Verse 26, whoever gives an honest answer kisses the lips. So let's take a look at the Hebrew here. This looks very interesting. Oh, I got a message from... Okay. Let's see here. Verse 26. So it kind of, how does it translate? So, whoever gives, that's a real smooth out version. He who gives an answer, a right one, the lips kisses. And the Hebrew actually puts the lips kisses first, which is interesting, right? So the lips This is a third masculine singular. So he kisses, right? The lips he kisses. He who gives an answer that is right. It's a cool way of saying it, I think. It's definitely how Hebrews think. Um, so we have to ask the lips of who, right? God has been given humanistic characteristics many times throughout the Bible. In the book of Exodus, when God is angry, the Hebrew literally says that his nostrils flare. Again, in Exodus, it talked about God's mighty right hand. He's got a right hand that's going to pull the people out of Israel. So God's given human characteristics pretty regular. Where would be another one? Well, I mean, you see, in Isaiah's story, you see basically kind of a representation of God with his face veiled, but it's like a pretty typical representation of what we would see. Maybe, I don't want to say in a human, but like in a body, right? So he who gives the right answer kisses the lips. And I can't help but think here. So, okay, these are, let's say, the idea being here is that you kiss the very lips of God when you give a right answer, an honest answer. In other words, you do the right thing. You do a godly thing when you give a right answer. So what about this? The lips he kisses, he who gives a right answer. What about Judas? Yeah? He kisses the lips of Jesus and he gives, I guess you wouldn't call it a wrong answer, because he says, he who I kiss is Jesus of Nazareth, right? So it's not a wrong answer, but it's definitely an answer dripping with, betrayal and jealousy. Maybe Judas was very irritated that Jesus wasn't doing the things he wanted him to do. Right? You should be preaching to these people, doing these things. And Peter's like, or Jesus is like, no, I'm doing exactly what I want to do. And then the whole alabaster ointment thing with Judas as well. Like, oh, how dare he waste all this money? And Jesus knows that Judas is stealing from the bag, which is a totally hypocritical thing to say. How dare he waste all this money? And Jesus is like, well, how much money have you wasted stealing from the bag, man? I mean, come on. It's just an interesting thing here, right? Giving a right answer, giving a good answer, a truthful answer, let's say, is kissing the very lips of God. It's a godly thing. That's fun stuff right there. Okay, we're gonna go through 29. It appears. So prepare your work outside, get everything ready for yourself in the field, and after that, build your house. It's kind of interesting. This is similar to when they return from the exile, and the very first thing they do when they return back and they're going through various building projects. You'd kind of wonder yourself, a lot of people didn't go back. A lot of people actually stayed in Babylon. They didn't want to go back to Israel. And you're like, why? Why would they? For the very same reason that a lot of, it was a very tough road to hoe to be a pilgrim, or to maybe not a pilgrim, like a pioneer in America. And studying religion and studying religious history too. It was hard for, I think it was Henry Melchior. I can't remember who it was. He was a Lutheran pastor on the Eastern Coast, and he was trying to recruit pastors to go out and work into the western areas of the states. And when he was recruiting them, he basically put out a thing like, I need hardy men, I need strong men, young men to go out there, because this is going to be a hard task. Going back to Israel was a hard task. You went out there, and the Jerusalem had been kind of razed to the ground. A lot of the other smaller communities, small towns, they had been destroyed too. So you're going back to basically live in squalor. All the buildings are torn down. There's not a lot there. And the very first thing they do when they get back to Jerusalem is they build the wall around the city. Why? Well, because there's no protection from Roman marauders. I don't think they have a lot to fear from the Persian army, but they do have it's not like they're the only threat. There are smaller groups. You have Aram to the north. You have Edom to the south. You have Egypt even further to the south and to the west. you've got enemies. So the first thing they do is they build the wall first, and then they rebuild the temple, and then they rebuild the royal palaces, kind of simultaneously, those two. Actually, no, I think I might have that wrong. I think the temple might be first, then the walls, then the royal palaces. The point being is that there was a priority here. And I think that's what's going on here as well. Prepare your work outside. In other words, put in your crop first, then worry about where you're going to sleep, right? Because you can't make corn, you can't make wheat, you can't make barley grow any faster than it's going to grow, right? So put, it's it's the old adage, like you get up in the morning, you're gonna have crock pot stew later tonight. Well, you put it in at 10 o'clock, because if you put it in at 4:45 and you're gonna eat at 5:30, that ain't gonna work, right? You got to plan your day accordingly. So make good choices, prepare your workouts, put in the crop first, and then after that, build your house. 28, be not a witness against your neighbor without cause, and do not deceive with your lips. I'm trying to figure to myself how 27 fits into the larger. My study Bible says, it's kind of funny for verse 27. This proverb has a particularly useful application to marriage. One ought to be financially and spiritually stable before getting married. How is anyone financially, and let alone spiritually stable before you? I mean, I get it, but if we're going to sit down and wait till we're absolutely, I've got 3 months of income saved, so if I lose my job, and she's got 3, if you wait that long, you're going to be married in your 40s. There is also this idea. I would kind of disagree with the commentator here on the notes, because there is this thing that if for a woman to have children it's harder on her body when she's in her 30s and 40s than when she's in her 20s. It just is. Your body recovers better. It recovers faster. It's easier to carry children when you're in your 20s than when you're in your 40s. So, yeah, I mean, being financially prepared is nice, but also having your children when you're young enough and strong enough to do it also is nice too. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that answer. I'm trying to figure out how 27 fits in the larger scale of 26 and 28. I'm not sure if it does. Maybe it's just an outlier. Perhaps it's talking about, maybe it's getting at this idea of if you're going to trial, if you're going to be in trial, make your preparations before you start making your argument. Maybe that's how it's connected. Or like I said, it could just be a random verse in the middle of these others. Because we go back to this kind of witness stuff in 28. Be not a witness against your neighbor without cause, and do not deceive with your lips. I mean, that seems really strange. This is 8th commandment stuff, right? Be not a witness against your neighbor without cause. I think this happens. I think we look across at our neighbor for a lot of reasons. I really feel guilty. I wish I had more time to do projects at home. I don't. And I also am not I can be lazy at times too when I go home. So it's a little of both. I feel very guilty. I would feel very guilty if my neighbors were very frustrated, because my house doesn't look the greatest all the time. This project's kind of halfway done, and I'm sure it's frustrating for them. I'd hate to be a burden on my neighbors. I'm doing my very best to try to make my house look as nice as possible so that my neighbors aren't frustrated. So I could see there being a reason. Maybe if your neighbor was in a bad way frustrating, or if your neighbor had something better and you were looking over the fence at what they have, and perhaps out of jealousy, you might do things that would hurt your neighbor. The only reason we should give testimony against our neighbor is when he needs us to, or when someone above us, we have to honor the 4th commandment as well. So if a policeman, a judge, someone above us comes and asks what happened, we have to also give an account as well. But we shouldn't just be willing to burn our neighbor down just because we don't like him or because we're jealous. Yeah. Do not deceive with your lips. I mean, this is the 8th commandment. This is the 8th commandment. Don't tell lies, right? Don't. The 8th commandment, I love it too. It's so it's so full. There's so many things there. How many of you guys have looked at that lately, right? So the 8th commandment has, in the meaning, I think, Luther does such a great job of this. Do not give false testimony against your neighbor. And false testimony is such a great term because it just covers so many things, right? So God does a good job to start, which is expected. Then Luther, he does his best to explain. Like, what does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbor. That's pretty straightforward. Betray him. So that's the thing here, is that we can lose sight of this. So we might make it simply all about lies. Well, I never told a lie. Yeah, but maybe he told you something in secret, in confidence, and you went then and blew that around town, right? Maybe he didn't mean for you to tell other people this thing. Maybe he needed to share something, or she, right, needed desperately to share something, and you took that thing and you used it as a tool to destroy that person. Or just because you like telling gossip. Just because someone tells you something doesn't mean it's yours to tell everybody else, right? So betray him, slander him, hurt his reputation. So, and then Luther talks about, I think, in the 7th commandment, which is interesting, thou shalt not steal. Or maybe it's in the 8th commandment. He talks about, no, it's in the 8th commandment. He talks about ruining someone's reputation is stealing that thing from them, because the reputation is a very important thing. You can't really make it. You can't really create it. It just kind of comes over time of being loyal, right? Of being a good person, of being just and upright. So when you destroy that, you literally are stealing from them something that's very important that they can't get back. And that's absolutely true. Reputation is so important. And when someone takes it away, it can't be just rebuilt overnight. Yeah. Good stuff. Okay, let's finish up here. Verse 29. Do not say, I will do to him as he has done to me. I will pay the man back for what he has done. Do not say, I will do to him as he has done to me. I will pay the man back for what he has done. I think this is, it's funny, Leviticus actually does say eye for eye, tooth for tooth, meaning that there was always a series of escalation in ancient times. So you take his ear, he takes your eye. You take his eye, he takes your leg. You take his leg, you take his life, right? It's just this Hatfield McCoy's kind of stuff, right? Things just keep escalating. And Leviticus is saying, no, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. So if he hurts this, you hurt that. That's it. That's where it stops. But then this just seems like it's going even further. This is more of like a Christ-like saying, like, I will do to him as he has done to me. So that seems very much like Leviticus. I will pay the man back for what and perhaps that's not fair. Maybe Leviticus is trying to lay down the rule, like this is the minimum, or this is the line. Don't cross it. But perhaps Proverbs is appealing to the Spirit. It's appealing to the gospel. Appealing to the saint, saying, that might be your right, but don't say it. Don't do it. Don't be that way. It is much better to have mercy and compassion. Because if we look at Christ, or we look at God, in the Old Testament, Christ not having been necessarily fully revealed yet, right? So just God in the Old Testament. Jonah, the Ninevites had every reason to be wiped off the face of the planet. They repent and God forgives, right? And there's, goodness sakes, Samson, in a way, is forgiven, right? He kind of repents of his ways, and God gives him strength one more time to topple the temple. Moses is forgiven because of his taking water from the rock but not praying before it. Let's see. Trying to think of specific people who are forgiven as opposed to peoples. Trying to think of someone offering sacrifice for forgiveness. Oh, David. David's forgiven of his sin against God and his sin with Bathsheba. but there are consequences that come out of it, just like there are consequences that come out of a lot of these things. So I think maybe 29 is an appeal to the gospel, an appeal to be compassionate, merciful, right? Do not say, I will do as he has done to me, I will pay back for what he has done. Because the man of wisdom knows that, my goodness, if we operate like this all the time, we would just be a primitive people going around hurting each other. Forgiveness allows us to consider wisdom, to consider higher thoughts, because otherwise we would be consumed with vengeance, and that's not going to help anybody. Okay, we're on to Micah. We didn't get far last time. I looked back at the previous video where we kind of left off, and if my calculations are right, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, we got through verse 8 of chapter 5. So we have left verses 9 through 15 of chapter 5, and then we'll haul off into chapter 6 and 7 and so on and so forth. We're drawing to a close on Micah. It's not going to be forever, but we still have some days left. Why don't we read all of these verses, just one after another, and then we'll go back and talk a little bit about them. So perhaps we should talk a little bit about where we've been. God had some pretty heavy things to say to Israel in like verse chapters 3. So we had he's going to, like, the end of chapter 3 is, therefore because of you, Zion shall be plowed as a field, Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins, and the mountain of the house a wooded height. So God lays down that punishment's coming because Israel has acted very poorly and not lived up to its calling, and sought after other gods. I mean, it's first commandment stuff. They're worshiping other gods. There's just a ton of things wrong. But then God lays down gospel, chapter 4, the mountain of the Lord shall rescue Zion. And then there's going to be a ruler born in Bethlehem, which we know, of course, we read almost every year during Christmas time. So we get into chapter 7, and maybe not chapter 7, verse 7, and then 7 through 15, but we're going to start at 9 today because we already covered 7 and 8. The idea is this, that just because, so Micah's laying down the prophecy, and he's laying down the judgments coming, and the people very well might turn away from their sins. They don't, but they might. But it seems as though the exile is a done deal. It's gonna happen, right? There's no getting out of it. There's no getting away from it. They're going to go into exile, and then God is going to deliver them out of exile. So very much like when they went into Exodus, they're going to go into exile. They're going to go into a foreign country. They're going to grow by leaps and bounds, and then they're going to return home eventually. That's kind of what's happening here in 7 through 15, right? So let's take a look at verse 9 and to recap where we've been, where we're going. Verse 9: your hand shall be lifted up over your adversaries, and all your enemies shall be cut off. And in that day, declares the Lord, I will cut off your horses from among you, and I will destroy your chariots, and I will cut off the cities of your land, and throw down all your strongholds, and I will cut off sorceries from your hand, and you shall have no more tellers of fortunes, and I will cut off your carved images and your pillars from among you, and you shall bow down no more to the works of your hands. And I will root out your Asherah images from among you, and destroy your cities. And in anger and wrath I will execute vengeance on the nations that did not obey. The reason why I wanted to do the whole thing was to get a sense of who are we talking to here? Who is this vengeance coming down upon, right? So we have back in verse 7. Then the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many peoples, right? Which kind of happens. They go off under the jackboot of the Babylonians, and then after that the Persians come and they take over. And then after that, it's the Greeks, and then after that, it's the Romans. Now, of course, the Israelites come back under the rule of Cyrus the Great, so they're already home during the Persian Empire. And then Greece conquers the areas of Israel, right? But also the areas where the Israelites are living still in Babylon. So in both places they're living, they're conquered. And then, of course, the Israelites have spread out to a lot of different places, not just Babylon and Israel, but also into the Roman areas, into the Greek areas. There's Jews kind of all over the place. This is the idea we call the Diaspora, right? There's Jews in a lot of different places. They're going to grow up and become strong, which is what happens. They go to Babylon. They end up doing fairly well there, and have communities, enclaves, and they teach their ancient writings and teachings, and they hold to their culture. So they do pretty well there, right? So verse 9, then, we get this beginning. The remnant of Jacob shall be, let's start at verse 8. The remnant of Jacob shall be among the nations, in the midst of many peoples, like a lion among the beasts of the forest, like a young lion among the flocks of sheep, which when it goes down through, treads down and tears in pieces, and there is none to deliver. Your hand shall be lifted up over your adversaries, and all your enemies shall be cut off. I'm trying to make sense of the verse 9 here. I'm going to actually open up the Hebrew here and see if that's helpful. Give me a moment here. Micah chapter 5, verse 9. Okay. Shall be lifted your hand against your adversaries, and all your enemies shall be cut off. Now, I would tend to think that if this was, so we get oftentimes God's mighty right hand, his Yarad, and here it is the same thing. Yarad, your Yarad, shall be lifted against your adversaries. Honestly, I can see this being translated either way. Okay. So verse 5:8, like a lion, symbol of ferocious strength, God's people share in his power and are triumphant in the midst of their foes. So I guess the question I have to myself, and I've been looking at and trying to figure out, I don't have a Micah commentary, so I don't have much more in my study notes. I should look more deeply into this. I'm trying to figure out if it's God's hand lifted against his enemies. And so God's enemies are God's people's enemies. God's people's enemies are God's enemies. I mean, it's the same thing. When God says, whatever you loose on earth will be loose in heaven, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. So there's this reality of the things are the same on both sides of creation, both sides of eternity, let's say. So it's very comforting to think that God's hand is going to be lifted against. So if it's your hand, so we could say it a different way in English, God's hand is going to be lifted against his enemies. But his enemies are our enemies, right? Sin, death, power of the devil. His hands will be lifted against them. All our enemies shall be cut off. I mean, yeah, there's just a lot of the ways this verse can go. What if we were talking about the last day? God's D-Day, so to speak, right? He's going to come in and he's going to finally bring an end to all evil, suffering, strain, and evil. I said evil twice. Sorry. So perhaps that's what he means here. This could be a prophetic understanding, right? All are his enemies, and his enemies are our enemies. We cut off. Sin, death, and power of the devil will be cut off. Thanks be to God. I'm looking forward to that day. Or it could have a very simple meaning that, referring back to where we came from, that they're in exile, they're going to grow as a remnant, but eventually they're going to become so powerful because they're God's people. That they'll lift their hands up against their enemy. I think in this sense, your rod would probably be the idea of a hand fit with a weapon, right? So if I lift up my hand, I've probably got I'm rallying war cries. I've got a sword. I've got a weapon. So your hand will be lifted up against you'll go to battle against your enemies, and they shall all be cut off. It's a prophecy of winning. Yeah, winning. So verse 10, Yahavah, and it shall be Bayom Ha'och Naham Yahweh Ve Hakaro Karoti Sus. By the way, that's a fun one. Susim is your horses. Sus is a Hebrew word for horse. Oh, it's funny. And it shall be in that day that Yahweh says, I will cut off from the midst your horses from your midst and destroy your chariots. Well, we remember that whenever we're looking at the Old Testament, Exodus is the gospel. And I don't mean to be cryptic about that. All of the miraculous things, God being present in a very kind of incarnational borderline way, right? He's there in a pillar of fire, pillar of cloud. He walks by, Moses sees his back. He's more present there than really a lot of places in the Old Testament. So we look at if we were ever to try to interpret metaphors in poetry or in prophecy, we should think about the Exodus. It's their kind of root metaphor, right? Just like in Judeo-Christian cultures for us, the Gospels are a root metaphor, right? It's just how we look at things. We interpret on we're looking for Christ, and we're seeing Christ because of what's in the Gospel. So God definitively crushes the horses and the chariots of the Egyptians in the heart of the Red Sea. That's a true thing. And in a metaphorical way, horses and chariots are this generation's tanks and nuclear weapons, right? I mean, it's the things that they have that make them feel safe at night, that no one's going to destroy them, right? Well, I mean, for goodness sakes, God's saying, I'm going to take all this, I'm going to take your swords and beat them into plowshares, kind of stuff. Right? I was like, doesn't matter what you have, I'm going to take it away from you and destroy it. Or again, so God's enemies are our enemies, or this could be talking about, and it shall be in that day that verse 10. Yeah, I don't think there's any, there could be this understanding again that God's enemies are our enemies are God's enemies, that he works through Israel. Right, so when God walks into goes to Jericho, for example, highly fortified city, the Israelites should not be able to take it over. God is in a pillar of cloud and fire on the Ark of the Covenant as they're marching around the city, right? But at the end of the day, who does the killing? For lack of a better way to say it, who does the killing? The soldiers do. The army does. God knocks down the walls of the city, and then the soldiers go in. They finish. So what God is doing is hard to separate from who's doing it. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Prophetically, God is going to cut off the enemies, right? Destroy the horses and the chariots. Well, perhaps God's going to do that through the armies that are poised and ready to do that thing. Or perhaps he's going to do it in a miraculous way that like Gideon, right? I only want 300 men just to make sure you understand that I'm the one who won this day, not you. I mean, either way, right? So in that day declares the Lord, the day what? Where your hand will be lifted up over your adversaries, your enemies shall be cut off, right? When the remnant of Jacob is becoming strong and rising up against its captors, right? I will cut off your horses from you, I will destroy your chariots, and I will cut off the cities of your land and throw down all your strongholds. So cities are always pernicious in terms of when you're waging war. Romans oftentimes would bypass cities when they figured that the city wasn't worth the effort it would take to destroy it. They would just bypass it. They'd cut off all the supplies and they'd wait them out. But when you're marching through the land, the empty farmland is not necessarily as difficult to. I mean, we see this in World War II documentaries. I don't know a lot about World War One. I imagine it was the same thing then too. Is that your hardest places of fighting, your most concentrated areas of casualties and difficulty is the cities, right? Because people are concentrated there. There's fortified embankments. It's not as easy to take as open land in the country, right? So, in other words, the same way with the horses and the chariots. You think your cities, you think your walls are going to protect you? No, they're not going to protect you. I'll throw them down. And now I will cut off sorceries from your hand. You shall have no more tellers of fortunes. In a modern parlance here, so to speak, science. And I'm not saying that I'm a science denier. I love, in fact, science is my favorite subject in high school and in grade school. What I mean is that we trust it to such an extent that, in other words, why do you trust a sorcerer or a fortune teller? So I think what God's doing is going through all your pockets that you're placing your trust in, that nothing bad's going to happen, and God's just taking them away. Your chariots, your horses, don't worry, I'm going to wipe them out. Your cities and your strongholds, I'm going to knock them down. Your sorcerers and your fortune tellers, well, what do these people do? They're using otherworldly skills, maybe on the battlefield, maybe to protect their nations. Fortune tellers, if you know what's coming, you can prepare for it, you can do something. And then, sorcery through things that are not typically known. What is sorcery but magic, right? We're using magic, so things beyond our comprehension and understanding, making the battle easier. Well, I mean, to a lot of us, that's science. What's going on at the CERN? What's going on in astrophysics lab? There's these places that are working on fusion experiments and the space shuttle thing that's been around the Earth for almost 300 days now or something. That's an unmanned drone in space circling the globe. But we'll probably maybe put some faith in that, like, oh, well, we've got things to protect us. We'll be okay. Don't do that. Don't trust in things you don't understand or magical powers or whatever the case may be. Or maybe we can just be simple and say how crazy the world's gotten. We do have sorcerers. We do have people who practice witchcraft. So anyway, I will cut off your carved images and your pillars from among you. Carved images is just a reference here to idols, and your pillars. So pillars, various gods you would maybe make images of, and then there are other gods that are represented by pillars. Let's take a look here so we can find it. Carved images such as Baal, pillars, Genesis 28:18. I'm guessing that's maybe a reference to astropoles, but let's take a look at what the study Bible here has for us. Genesis 28? I should look closer. 28:18. Genesis 28:18. 28:18. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. Wow. 18. Pillar. Matsiba. An elongated stone set in the ground like a short pillar for cultural or religious purposes. Raising of such stones is ancient. They appear much like grave markers with rounded tops. At Canaanite temple sites, the stones could represent worshippers or gods whose images are carved on the faces of some stones. Such stones could also serve as markers. So in other words, Jacob's doing he's trying to mark a godly thing that happened, the Jacob's ladder, but he does it using a common way amongst the pagan cultures around him, erecting a pillar, right? So in general, Jacob does it, okay, good thing. In general, pillars, not a great thing, okay? And you shall bow down no more to the work of your hands. This is interesting. I was mentioning to you about the China thing. So they're They're removing all depictions of Jesus, but they're also putting up depictions of Z, the president of the Communist Party there, or however that's worded. I don't know if it's called a president, but in Roman culture, they would worship Caesars. That was pretty regular. I don't know how that's. Maybe it's just a general slight at idols in general, right? That you worship things that someone makes, right? Someone carves this idol, someone carves this pillar, and you're worshiping it. That's crazy. So, and you shall bow down no more to the work of your hands, and I will root out your Asherah images from among you. That's interesting. Images. Yeah, Asherah images are usually wooden posts or trees that were seen as access points to the favorable presence of the goddess. And destroy your cities, and in anger and wrath I will execute vengeance on the nations that did not obey. With everything that's been happening lately, I'll just maybe close the Bible study today with, if you're watching the numerous things that are going on, the unrest in various places in our world, and the traumatic things that are going on in other places in our world, especially China right now, massive floods, earthquakes, and famine, drought, not drought, but they've got a locust problem, just a once in a generation type locust issue going on right now. I think it's always good. It's always good to be prepared for Christ to come. I wake every day, say a little prayer to myself that I might be a better pastor than I was yesterday. I ask the Lord to bless me in the various things I'm trying to get done today. Lately, I've been praying that the Lord would allow me to speak to someone the gospel that I haven't talked to before, like they could actually be doing that kind of work, that good work of evangelism. But every morning I remind myself, I try to. Today could be the day. Today could very well be the day that we go home. I am not saying that I can predict anything, but Jesus also did say, hey, there's going to be all sorts of signs, right? All sorts of things happening that should, maybe at least perk your ears up to be aware, to be kind of paying attention. So I might say this, do not be part of the nations that did not obey. And that comes off maybe ending very heavy on law. I'm not sure if that's right or wrong. Just remember that God loves you very much. He gave up his only son. I love my son to death. I would never give my son for anything, not even for myself. To think that God would give up his son for us when we hated him, when we rebelled against him every day. He has great love for us. Let us turn to him for our hope and our joy, for our peace and salvation. He will not disappoint. Blessings in the rest of your day. We'll take off on chapter 6 next week of Micah. We'll also take off on finishing up chapter 23 in Proverbs. This is very good to be, was it 23 or 24? I probably got that wrong. 24, excuse me. Finishing up chapter 24 in Proverbs. It's good to be with you all. God's blessings to you. I'm planning on beginning my Friday afternoon Bible study with Psalms, probably in person here at the church. Downstairs, we can do social distancing, but I will probably put that online as well. So we'll be back in the Psalms hopefully this week as well. We'll look forward to seeing you then. God's blessings.